What about NATO today? We're talking now about Finland and about Sweden becoming a part of NATO. And President Putin again and again warned that if they were to take that decision, there would be problems, there would be repercussions. Now, Turkey's a holdout at this point, but I'm told that that's only a matter of time before they decide that Finland and Sweden can be a part of NATO. What's your take on that? Because when we first met at the end of last year, we talked about Ukraine's ambitions for NATO and for Europe. And you said if we were a part of NATO right now, we wouldn't even be having this conversation.
Thank you for memorizing my words. That's really nice of you. And yes, I can say it again. I believe that Sweden and Finland understand Ukraine even better than they did, because they know now how it feels when you're trying to get to join the club, and a member of that club is like saying, I have questions. I have issues about that. But seriously, I don't think Putin has any serious leverage to prevent Finland or Sweden from becoming members of NATO. And that once again proves that the whole discourse about Ukraine not being ready to get Ukraine on board, or NATO not being ready, is not based on specific merits. It's based on the political understanding of who belongs with us and who doesn't. NATO is about to absorb a country that has many hundreds of kilometers of joint border with Russia, right next to St. Petersburg. And no one is taking care of all the arguments that Putin is making about the speed of the missile and the vicinity of the NATO military base to the capital of Russia. When it comes to Ukraine, the moment you raise the issue, you immediately hear hundreds of arguments why this is impossible. Hundreds.
Yes. People
were saying our army is not ready. Look at our army. It's the strongest. It's now the strongest army in Europe. I mean, among the European nations, we do not compete with the Americans for obvious reasons. NATO standards. We are fighting a war against someone who is much bigger than us, and knock on the wood, we are more successful than anyone expected. So all these technical discussions about standards, criteria, once there is a political decision that these guys belong to us, we are part of the same, everything else follows.
Yeah.
As long as there is no such political decision, you are hearing hundreds of arguments why this is impossible. We understand how this business works. But I believe that many in NATO lost moral and professional ground to make any comments with regard to Ukraine.
Do you believe that you will ever be part of NATO?
Now I'm focused on something completely different. We are now focused on winning the war. And, my people criticize me for saying that NATO did nothing since the beginning of the war. And my NATO experts, they say I have to be more constructive. But I am constructive. My point is very simple. We see allies helping Ukraine out. We see this group of allies, NATO allies, helping us. But in the beginning of the war, the people of Ukraine, it was a public sentiment. They believed that NATO is the strong force, and EU is only capable of expressing various levels of concern, and that's it. But the war is always a test that rips masks off. And we all saw real faces. What we saw are some revolutionary, groundbreaking decisions taken by the European Union, which even they themselves did not expect to make. And we see NATO as an alliance, as an institution, sidelined and doing literally nothing, I'm sorry to say it. I do not complain on allies.
Do you see them as irrelevant?
No, I think it's actually the decision of the allies themselves
to remain,
not to do it, not to allow NATO as an institution to act under these circumstances, because for their concerns, which they have, like NATO, Russia at war, all this stuff. But again, when it comes to accommodating Finland and Sweden, no one is making the point that this increases the risk of NATO and Russia coming at war with each other. So there is an element of hypocrisy in this. I understand that this is life. We as a country, we spent 30 years fighting prejudices and stereotypes in attitudes towards Ukraine, so I can live with it. Don't get me wrong, I think NATO is important. The European integration of Ukraine to NATO is part of our constitution. Jens Stoltenberg, as Secretary General, is a man who really does his best. But we see that these circumstances are not the good ones for NATO to show its best. And therefore, we can speak openly about the status quo.